Today's episode is brought to you by the Daily Gardener Friday newsletter. You can sign up for the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. Hi there, and welcome to The Daily Gardener, a podcast about garden history and literature. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling, and today is October 6th. Well, this time of year is occasionally my least favorite time of year. It actually reminds me a little bit of the feeling I get after Christmas when I've taken down all my decorations and then I'm trying to figure out what did I do to make the house look good again. And this is a transition phase just like that. And so what I'm talking about is right now I have brought in probably close to 30 to 40 houseplants, I'm betting, between here and the cabin. So I have the cabin ones that I just took care of today, and then I have some that I brought into Maple Grove. And then to make matters worse, I ran into a huge houseplant sale at Hy-Vee. They were discounting all of their 6-inch houseplants. And I thought, I'll switch out some of my houseplants that aren't looking so hot. But there's the idea of that, and then there's actually doing it, which is really hard to do after you've nurtured some of these little guys along so long. But now I know I have my mom tucked into taking some of my incredible succulent bowls that I had up at the cabin. They were just tremendous this year. They were her favorite, and so she's kind of laid claim to them. But then when it comes to everything else, we'll just have to see what ends up making the cut. I was actually thinking I might put something up on Facebook Marketplace and see if there aren't some local gardeners that want a few new houseplants or new to them houseplants. We'll see what happens. Anyway, I have so much to talk about when it comes to my houseplants, but I will hold on to that and share it with you in some future episodes. So just a few thoughts on houseplants. It'll definitely keep. Anyway, today is Garlic Lovers Day, and garlic, or stinking rose, as it's often referred to, is a member of the lily family, not the rose family. So you've got onions, leeks, and shallots that are also in that family. And one little tidbit that you might want to share with any student gardeners or kids that you're gardening with is that all alliums are very reactive to the amount of daylight they receive. And so a great way to think about the garlic life cycle is that it matures during the longest days in the summer. And that's easy for me to remember because I'm a summer birthday, and my birthday is right around the summer solstice, and that is when the garlic matures. But for a lot of gardeners, that can be a mystery. When does garlic mature? It's not as obvious as something that's maturing right in front of your eyes. Garlic can be forgotten about. So if you just remember that they're mature when we have maximum daylight, then you'll always know when to harvest your garlic. And this is why autumn right now, this is garlic planting time in most areas. And many gardeners wait until after the fall equinox in the back half of September to plant their garlic. This year's autumnal equinox was September 22nd, September 22, 2022. So hopefully you got your garlic planted. If not, it's not too late. You can still do it. Get it in the ground right now. You'll be just fine. But all that said, most of us know and love garlic as a culinary staple, whether or not we grow it for ourselves. And Alice May Brock wrote one of my favorite quotes about garlic. Alice is an American artist, author, and former restaurateur. And she once wrote, "Tomatoes and oregano make it Italian. Wine and tarragon make it French. Sour cream makes it Russian. Lemon and cinnamon make it Greek. Soy sauce makes it Chinese. Garlic makes it good." And Anthony Bourdain, in his book Kitchen Confidential, wrote this about garlic. "Garlic is divine. Few food items can taste so many distinct ways handled correctly. Misuse of garlic is a crime. Please treat your garlic with respect. Avoid at all costs that vile spew you see rotting in oil in screw-top jars. Too lazy to peel fresh? You don't deserve to eat garlic. And I just have to say before I close out this little homage to garlic that I always think back to one of my interviews that I did with Brie Arthur. She's the author of the book Foodscape Revolution. And when I spoke with her, what she does with garlic is both a fantastic space saver and very smart. She plants her garlic along the perimeter of all of her beds. And that way she gets a ton of square footage that's devoted to growing garlic. And at the same time, it doesn't take up an entire bed. It's just the edges of the bed. And the other thing that I like about it is that when it comes time to harvest the garlic, well, then it's right there within reach, right on the edge of the bed. So smart. All right, let's get to today's garden history. It was on this day, October 6th, in 1794, that Charles Wilkins Short, the American botanist and doctor, was born. Charles was honored in the naming of many plants, including the Oconee bell, named the Shortia galasifolia, the plant that Charles is most remembered for. And the reason that he's most remembered for this particular plant is that the location of the plant became a huge mystery during the 1800s. But finally, in May of 1877, a North Carolina teenager named George Hyams found an unknown specimen, an unknown plant, when he was out in the woods with his dad. And so he took that specimen and he sent it to Harvard's top plant expert, the knowledgeable Asa Gray, who could be heard crying "Eureka" from his office when he finally saw the Shortia specimen. And I can imagine what that moment must have been like for him, opening up the box or container, whatever this plant was in, and then laying eyes on it. And then he, being the expert that he is, he knew exactly what he was looking at. And here he had gone all over tarnation trying to find this plant. And a North Carolina teenager ends up sending it to him. He had to be just completely blown away by that. Well, 2 years later, Asa and his wife, along with his dear friend, the botanist John Redfield, as well as the director of the Arnold Arboretum at Harvard, Charles Sprague Sargent, and then finally the botanist William Canby. And this small group of people got to see the Shortia in the wild, in that spot where George Hyams knew that it was growing. And so if you can imagine, these scientists, they are all standing around this tiny little patch of earth where the Shortia was growing in oblivion. And the long search to find the Shortia, to lay eyes on it in the wild, to see this plant that was named for Charles Wilkins Short. Well, that search was over, and the year was 1879, and one of the greatest plant mysteries of all time had been solved. Well, if you're wondering what the Shortia or the Oconee bell looks like, I think you'd be a little underwhelmed. There's really not much to it. It's a very small, diminutive little plant. It is still considered, by the way, a very rare plant in North America. But imagine, if you will, a little clump of shiny green leaves at the base of this plant that are right on the ground. And then out of that come these little flowers that are on stems that are about maybe 3-4 inches tall. And then you've got this little white flower. That's really all there is to it. It's a white flower with a yellow center. It's a happy little thing. It's very woodlandy. But it's not like they were stumbling on a bird of paradise or something like that. This is a very, very subtly beautiful plant, but again, a very small in stature specimen. So just a tiny little plant the shortia. Aptly named, by the way, because it is a little plant. It's a short little guy. But remember, that is not why it is named the shortia. It is named for the botanist Charles Short. Aha! Something to remember if you're working with student gardeners so that they don't get the two confused. Kids often make connections like that, and so it's really good to stay on top of that and help them to understand the origin story behind a lot of the plant names that we run into. All right, and today is also the day that we celebrate the English botanist, geologist, physician, and chemist, William Withering. He died on this day, October 6th, in 1799. William was a doctor, and he was also the first person to study digitalis, most commonly known as the foxglove plant. The story goes that one day William had a patient who was suffering from what was then called dropsy. That's an old word that people used to use to describe someone suffering from heart failure. In this instance, William observed that the patient in question showed remarkable improvement after William gave this person an herbal remedy that included digitalis, or foxglove. Because remember, back in 1799, you couldn't go to CVS, you couldn't go to Walgreens or Hy-Vee and get your prescription. And so William is relying on what he is learning about herbal medicine. And when he puts this particular concoction together and he includes digitalis, he observes his patient getting better. And suddenly, the foxglove becomes very, very important. It becomes a very valuable tool in his toolkit to help his patients with dropsy. William is the person that is credited for figuring out that digitalis was the key ingredient. It was the active ingredient that was helping his patients that had heart issues. In 1785, William publishes what would become his most famous work. It was called An Account of the Foxglove and some of its medicinal uses. And so now, if you have foxgloves growing in your garden, hopefully you will see them not only as a beautiful plant, but as a plant that really had an impact on our modern medicine. Foxgloves are a beautiful garden plant, but you have to be careful with foxglove because foxgloves are toxic. And you know, one of the things that is also a challenge with foxglove is that when it first comes out of the ground, it looks like other plants. It can be really difficult to tell. So if you don't have it marked, you might have to wait a little bit and see what happens. Is this foxglove, or is this comfrey, or is this plantain? Which is not so strange because foxglove is actually in the plantain family. So that makes sense. And another plant that foxglove can be easily confused with as it's starting to grow is great mullein. So if you have great mullein in your garden, not everybody does. A lot of people think it is weedy, but it's a cottage garden favorite. And I think if you're an experienced gardener, you tend to be maybe a little more open to growing great mullein. In any case, if you have any experience growing it, you'll definitely see how the foxglove can be confused with great mullein. So bottom line, there are a lot of plants that can be confused for foxglove, and that's why it's so important to have it marked. Whether or not you decide to actually grow foxglove in your garden, there can be no dispute that digitalis has some of the most adorable common names of any plant, including foxglove. But they can also be called fairy fingers, fairy thimbles, and the rabbit's flower. And to go along with all of those wonderful names, there are many delightful stories, origin stories about the foxglove. One of my favorite stories is the one about the fairies that gave foxgloves, the little blossoms, to a fox so that he could put them on his feet, he could put the flowers on his toes, and then he could walk without a sound as he was hunting for his prey. And so that's why you have those little markings on the inside of the flower. They're actually fox footprints, according to this little fable. Very, very sweet. But the toxicity of the foxglove is probably the biggest concern about this plant, although the gardener and garden writer Catherine White still enjoyed them in her gardens. The toxicity did not bother her. And she writes, "To me, it would be ridiculous, though, not to grow monkshood, foxglove, hellebore, larkspur, autumn crocus, poppies, lilies of the valley, buttercups, and many other flowers, just because they have some poison in them." So foxglove is in very good company when it comes to toxic plants in the garden. And when the botanical illustrator Walter Crane painted the foxglove, he did not draw it alone. He drew a foxglove family. And I always think that's the way they look the best in the garden, when they are part of a foxglove community. Walter Crane is remembered for personifying flowers, and so when he drew his foxglove family, he wrote these words about the foxgloves. "The foxgloves are a happy group comprised of cousins and brothers and sisters. Meet the foxgloves." And then finally, the English author and poet Meta Orid wrote a sweet little verse called In Memoriam. This was a poem for a deceased friend, and in the poem, Meta included the foxglove. She wrote, "Her lips like foxgloves, pink and pale, went sighing like an autumn gale. Yet when the sunlight passed by, they opened out with half a sigh. Her eyelids fell, and not in vain. The stars had found their heaven again. So lay her back to take her rest, our darling, for we loved her best. Her small hands crossed upon her breast, her quiet feet unto the west." Great little poem by Meta Orid, In Memoriam, with a little hint of foxglove. All right, and today we also celebrate the birthday of Jean-André Soulié, the French Roman Catholic missionary, herbalist, healer, and botanist. He was born on this day, October 6th, in 1858. Like many of the first plant collectors, Jean-André was a Catholic missionary working for the Paris Foreign Missions. Plant collecting in China during the time that Jean-André was there was a very dangerous task. Collectors not only encountered difficult terrain, but also political upheaval. The Opium Wars and the ongoing dispute with Tibet increased distrust and hostility. And this is something that Jean-André, unfortunately, got caught up in. He became collateral damage. He became a victim of the Lama revolt. He was abducted by Tibetan monks. He was kidnapped in the field as he was packing up his plant specimens. So he was in the middle of doing what he loved most. And then he was tortured for over 2 weeks before finally, mercifully, being shot dead by his captors. Today, the church that Jean-André helped build has been rebuilt. The original building was destroyed during the Revolution, but it eventually was rebuilt in a new location, and it still stands today in a community where Catholics and Tibetan Buddhists now live in peaceful coexistence. Jean-André Soulié is remembered for his discovery of so many different plants, but especially the Rosa Souliana and the butterfly bush, the Buddleia davidii. He is the person that discovered the butterfly bush, but he didn't get the name credit. That went to a different person. But Jean-André is also remembered in the name of a rhododendron, a lily, and a primula. So he is well remembered. And then finally, today we are also celebrating the English poet, nature writer, and critic Rosamund Marriott Watson, who was born on this day, October 6th, in 1860. She was known as Rose to her family and friends, and she wrote under the pseudonyms Graham R. Thompson and Rushworth Armitage. So quite a mouthful there for her pseudonyms, and definitely male. So her pseudonyms no doubt helped her get published. Rose was quite the gardener. She loved gardening, and she was also a prolific garden writer. And her writings were put together and published in a 1906 book called The Heart of a Garden. Great title. And Rose started out her book with one of her original poems. And the first verse goes like this. I dreamed the peach trees blossomed once again, dreamed the birds were calling in the dew. Sun rays fell round me like a golden rain, and all was well with us, and life was new. Well, great book. You should probably get that one. I know I say that every day, but it's so true. This is a really great garden classic. The Heart of a Garden was organized by seasons, and the early chapter on fall is something I took a quick gander at in light of the fact that it is fall right now, and I try to be timely for you. But Rose's chapter on fall is called The Breath of Autumn. She's really so poetic, isn't she? In this chapter, Rose wrote the following. One should not so much as breathe the name of frost as yet. It is, in a sense, a tempting of Providence, and late summer has so many good days in store for us still. The sundial has daily, but a few less, shining hours to number. Bats flit busily in the dim blue dusk, and roses are in bloom. It is far too early even to dream of frost. It's time to grow that garden library with today's book, Creating a Garden Retreat by Virginia Johnson. Well, this book came out this year in 2022, and the subtitle is An Artist's Guide to Planting an Outdoor Sanctuary. And I want you to key in on that word artist, because Virginia is an artist. And here's what Workman, the publisher, wrote about Virginia's book. Through ethereal illustrations, textile designer and artist Virginia Johnson takes the reader on her own garden journey, from blank slate to dreamscape and to secret garden, I might add. Well, over the years, Virginia has transformed a small, narrow city lot into a garden that is personal, carefree, wild, and welcoming. And it all began with a little fence that allowed her children to play freely. And in this book, Virginia explains how she created her garden with ease and clarity, bringing her ideas to life through words, but also through her charming illustrations, so that you can be encouraged and empowered to start your own garden journey or to take a new one. This book is organized into clear chapters, trees and shrubs, vines, flowers, seasons, edibles, and more. Now, what I like best about this book is that it feels like I am reading Virginia's garden journal. It's so friendly, from the handwriting font that she uses throughout the book to the beautiful sketches. I mean, this is truly an artist putting together a garden book. And so the art in this book, the watercolors are just gorgeous. They're breezy, they're casual, they accompany every single page, and they make this book such a joy to read. And the other thing that I love about what Virginia did with this book is she personalizes everything. She doesn't just talk about a plant. She talks about the plant and her family and her life. Let me give you an example. Here she's talking about her trees and shrubs, and she has this little section on magnolia. And then, of course, on this page are beautiful watercolors of magnolia. She writes, "Magnolia. I think these are the prettiest trees on the planet, but would they be too big for my garden? The classic saucer magnolia grows to 30 feet high and wide, but the magnolias in the National Arboretum's Girls series grow only 15 feet high. I love the teacup shape of their blossoms, and I love their architectural profile too. Multi-stemmed with outreaching branches. I chose the deep magenta blooming Anne to remind me of my grandmother, the Anne magnolia." So see what I mean? She's talking about the magnolia. She shares this really great tip about the smaller, more compact magnolias that are available. And then she personalizes it by telling us which one she picked and her emotional connection to that plant. Another aspect that I like about Virginia's book is that you can tell that she is cultured, that she has done some living. She's a traveler, she's a reader, and yes, she is romantic, and you can tell that by the flowers that she picks for her garden. But I wanted to share another little snippet, and this one is from a little section where she talks about vines. She writes, "Vines have always had romantic associations for me. Trailing vines, climbing vines. The words themselves are lyrical and promise not just growth, but a plant that wants to wriggle away like a child, to explore and attempt daring feats, scaling walls and structures and houses, all while showing off." And then she writes, "Trail, trail went Mrs. Wilcox's dresses through the garden in Howard's End. And they're so fun to paint. You have to get the feeling of them, capture their abundance and movement." Isn't that great? Virginia is also practical and thrifty, and that's a wonderful counterpoint to her artistic and evocative side. Virginia shares, "As a beginner gardener and a pragmatist, I spend my energy on perennial plants, not annuals. Who wants to plant a bunch of things that won't come up again next year? Of course, I do buy a few annuals, but only for pots. I also wanted blooms staggered throughout the growing season, so I took into account what was already in place, and it would all be a leap of faith." Well, leap she did. Virginia is definitely one of us. She is a gardener through and through. This book is full of many wonderful and relatable moments, delightful little snippets that make you laugh and smile and nod your head in agreement. I want to share one final little excerpt, and this is where she's talking about dining al fresco. And I thought this was so great because hopefully we have a few more opportunities to dine outside with family and friends before fall gives way to winter. Here's Virginia Johnson on dining al fresco. On a vacation in Greece, during a long drive through the mountains, our kids were ravenous. But the nearest village was closed for an afternoon siesta. Where to eat? My husband approached a tavern, explaining our situation in halting Greek. The cook fired up the stove and soon emerged with a steaming frittata, which my picky kids gobbled up. Ever since then, the frittata has become a family staple. Eggs, potatoes, salt, and a sprinkling of rosemary from our garden. That's it. We recreate the memorial meal and enjoy it in our own backyard, wearing our straw hats and imagining we're back in that Greek village. Isn't that a great story? Well, this book is 192 pages of wonderful memories like that. And it's all built around the garden and being a gardener. You can get a copy of Creating a Garden Retreat by Virginia Johnson and support the show using the Amazon link in today's show notes for around $14. And that's a steal. Well, we end today's show with a Botanic Spark and a happy birthday wish, many happy birthday wishes for Gilles Clément, the French gardener, garden designer, botanist, entomologist, and writer. He's a true Renaissance man, and he was born on this day, October 6th, back in 1943. As is often the case, Gilles started out experimenting in his own garden that he calls La Vallée. And during his long career dedicated to the natural world, Gilles devised many landscaping concepts, including the garden movement, the global garden, and something that he calls the third landscape. To Gilles, the term garden movement was inspired by the physical movement of plants in the garden. For example, in a garden, the gardener has to decide whether to allow the plants to spread or to control them. Garden movement. And then the global garden reflects that gardens are inextricably part of life on the planet. The planet is a global garden. And then the global garden reflects the fact that gardens are inextricably part of life on the planet. And the plants that are on the planet are confined by the limits of their environment. Now, today, our garden environments are experiencing radical changes as the Earth confronts climate change. And as the Earth goes, so go our gardens. And that is something that Gilles is passionate about exploring and talking about. And while many gardeners still think of gardens as enclosed spaces, often the literal translation of the word garden in so many languages, Gilles says ecology destroys the notion of the enclosed garden. Birds, ants, and mushrooms recognize no boundaries between territory that's policed and space that is wild. And then Gilles writes this, and I think this is very impactful. He writes, "The enclosure was always an illusion." And finally, Gilles' concept of a third landscape borrows its name from the Third Estate. Now, that's a term that was coined during the French Revolution to identify people who weren't part of the nobility or clergy. And so they were the Third Estate. Now, to Gilles, who is French, the third landscape represents the low places, the ordinary places, everyday places that are often forgotten, derided, ignored, or just outright abandoned by man. These misfit or orphaned areas lie outside the realms of agroforestry or land management. Third landscapes are made up of edges and odd-shaped parcels. They can be abandoned sites or neglected spaces along the margins of daily life. Think of highway shoulders, riverbanks, fallow areas, wastelands, and so on. Just think of all the third landscapes that are in and around your garden, your town, your community. And suddenly, your mind starts racing. I know mine did. Well, Gilles sees the third landscape as unembraced treasure, offering limitless potential for reinvention. And this has me thinking of the smart way that Brie Arthur utilizes a third landscape in her own garden, utilizing those edges to plant garlic. So clever. And something that Gilles would heartily endorse. As for the garden itself, Gilles once wrote, "A garden is territory where everything is intermingled, flowers, fruit, vegetables. I define the garden as the only territory where man and nature meet, in which dreaming is allowed. And it is in this space that man can be in a utopia that is the happiness of his dreams. So there we go, that blending of dreaming and gardens that we talked about earlier in the week, and hearkening back to one of my favorite garden quotes, that gardeners dream bigger dreams than emperors. Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening to The Daily Gardener. Dream big garden dreams today when you're in your garden. And if you haven't done so, get those houseplants back in. It's going to turn cold before you know it. And just a reminder that you have a standing invitation to join the free Facebook group for listeners of the show. The next time you're over at Facebook, just search for Daily Gardener Community, where you'd search for a friend and then request to join. And if you'd like more of The Daily Gardener, you can subscribe to the newsletter over at thedailygardener.org. And don't forget that you can also show your support for the show by using the Buy Me a Coffee link over at the website or in today's show notes. This is Jennifer Ebling. Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener. And remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day.